everybody, this is Captain Fred, your host for Aviation Theater, and a proud member of the San Diego Aerospace Museum, the first place to visit when you come to San Diego. We have a good program for you today, and we'll get started right after this important message. Once again, we're at the restoration hangar of the San Diego Aerospace Museum at Gillespie Airport in El Cajon, California. And visiting with us today is John Darmer, ex-jet jockey with the United States Air Force, member of the Antiquers, and an accomplished aviation artist. John, the first thing we want to talk about today is the F-86 Saberjet. And first of all, it wasn't supposed to be an F-86, it was supposed to be a P-86. Would you tell our audience about that, please?
Well, in World War II, the P designation was used as to stand for pursuit. But somewhere in the shuffle after World War II, they decided that they wanted to designate the pursuit-type aircraft as fighters, so they came up with the F designation.
So there was the P-40,
right,
the Flying Tiger, the P-38, the Lockheed Lightning, right, P-47, Republic Thunderbolt, those were all Ps.
Right.
And the Saberjet was going to be a P, but they changed it to an F at that particular time.
Right.
Also, the Saberjet was going to have a straight wing on
True.
it. The first two jets, had World War II continued, the first two jets for the United States were going to be the Republic Thunderjet, was that the?
Correct.
And the Lockheed something.
The P-80 Shooting Star.
Shooting Star. But both of those airplanes had traditional straight wings too. They wouldn't have made it, would they?
No.
So it was after North Americans studied the captured German jets that they decided to go with the swept wing design.
Right.
And would you tell us about the F-86 engine and what it consisted of?
Well, it was an axial flow engine. It developed 5,200 pounds of thrust, and it was J-47 was a designation of it.
General Electric.
Right.
J-47, and was 5,200 pounds of thrust?
Correct. No.
That's not horsepower.
No. No.
Tell our viewers the difference between horsepower and thrust.
Well, that's kind of a tough question to answer. I wasn't really prepared for that, but...
Well, let me say this, that a jet engine really only develops about 10 or 12 horsepower, but going the speed of sound, it works on thrust.
Correct.
So it's not how fast the spark plugs fire or the pistons go around. It's a completely different principle.
True.
Tell our viewers about the axial flow, because that's a completely different concept.
Well, there are two basic designs for jet engines. The centrifugal type of engine, centrifugal flow, which uses a single compressor wheel and single stage for compression of the gas or the air before it's ignited with the fuel. Whereas an axial flow engine uses stages of rotors and stators and increases the compression as it goes through. A stator is a rotor that's stationary. It's a series of vanes that are encased in the main casing in the engine, and the rotors with the turbine buckets attached rotate and push the air through the stators, and that helps to increase the compression of the air.
And so each one that it goes through increases it more?
Correct.
So by the time it's coming out the back, it's what, 20-fold or something like that?
Right. There's a system called the EPR, exhaust pressure ratio, and that's how you actually determine the thrust or the power that the engine is developing at a given RPM. And in fact, in the airplanes that I flew, we had to check for EPR before we could make our takeoff. And if it was within a certain reading, it was okay. We had an adequate amount of thrust, but if not, then we had to abort the mission.
Well, that's why a jet cannot take off immediately like an airplane. They have to sit there on the runway and build up. Is it thrust they're building up?
Yeah, it takes time for the thrust to build up.
And then they make their takeoff.
Right. Initial acceleration is pretty slow. The only thing that helps is an afterburner. If you don't have one, you're going to have a long takeoff roll, particularly on a hot day.
The first F-86 Saberjet flew October 1st, 1947, and the pilot was very interesting. Would you tell our viewers who the pilot was?
A fellow named Welch, and he had a successful takeoff, but somewhere during the flight he ran into some problems, little glitches that usually come up on a test flight, and apparently one of the gear did not extend, so he had to make a precautionary landing on the nose wheel in one main gear, and he did a great job. He brought the airplane in smoothly, and they patched it up and flew it again.
The landing bump made it come all the way down?
I guess that was what happened, yeah. He bumped the aircraft, and that unlocked that gear that was hung up there.
Mm-hmm. Tell our viewers why he was chosen for this flight. It was a singular honor.
Well, he was a top-notch pilot and had an excellent war record, and they felt that he would do a good job of flying the airplane initially.
He was at Pearl Harbor, and according to records, shot down the first Japanese airplane in World War II, which I assume was on December 7th there at Pearl Harbor that day. There were several Medal of Honors won at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, and just about everything that was done on that day was the first of World War II. The first shot fired, the first ship sunk, the first airplane downed, all occurred on December 7th. I want to talk a little bit about the armor plating around the cockpit of the F-86. It was a sturdy airplane and could fly with a lot of damage done to it, but it had armor plating. Would you tell our viewers about that?
Well, it had armor around the sides of the cockpit and a big slab behind the pilot, and this was to protect him from fire, enemy fire, and so he had a lot better chance of coming back from a mission than the fellow in the MiG-15, because they did not have that kind of armor protection.
Right. Now, the MiG-15, I said that the Corsairs ruled the skies in Korea until November 1950. In November 1950, the Russian MiG-16s showed up and completely changed the air war in Korea.
Very much so.
So that's when Congress ordered F-86 Saberjets to Korea, and the MiG versus the Saberjet contest began. The United States offered $100,000 cash reward for something. Tell our viewers about that.
Well, they offered $100,000 reward for delivery of a MiG-15 to American forces, and this offer was accepted by one of the North Korean pilots, a fellow named Roh, who flew into Kimpo Aerodrome with an F-8 or a MiG-15, and presented it to the Air Force, and we immediately started checking into it and looking at it and evaluating it in relation to the F-86. In fact, we did that in Korea, and Chuck Yeager was one of the first pilots to fly that airplane.
$100,000 then would be $1 million today.
Right, a lot of money.
The F-86 had something called leading edge slats for the pilot to control the plane better at low speeds. Would you tell our viewers what that is?
Well, basically, a leading edge slat is nothing more than a flap that's located on the leading edge of the wing, and what it does is it changes the camber of the wing to give more lift. And they pop out automatically or pop in automatically, depending on your airspeed and your angle of attack.
Oh, it's automatic. The pilot doesn't have to engage them or disengage them.
It's just automatic. They roll in and out on little trolleys there.
And it's just a flap that's on the leading edge. In Korea, during this confrontation between the MiG-16s and the F-86s, the United States had at least two aces that I can think of. One was Colonel Francis Gabroski, Gabby Gabroski.
Right.
He had been an ace in World War II, I think 28 kills. Yep. And then became a jet ace in Korea. And tell our viewers about the other ace. They probably saw the movie about the other ace.
Well, they may have. This was Joe McConnell, who was also a World War II fighter pilot, and he became an ace in Korea flying the F-86. A very, very nice man, as well as a top-notch pilot. He did a lot of things for, I think, Korean War offense while he was there.
He had like 15, 16 kills, something like that.
Yeah,
and they brought him back here to California, Edwards Air Force Base, and he became a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base.
Right.
And hung out at Pancho Barnes's bar, the Happy Bottoms Riding Club. After the war, the F-86 was manufactured by other countries too.
True.
If I can remember correctly, it was Canada, Australia, India, and somebody else. But I'd like for you to tell our viewers about what Australia did with the F-86.
Well, they liked the airplane, but they felt that it was a little underpowered, so they put the Rolls-Royce Avon engine in it and almost doubled the thrust.
That was a bomber engine.
Yeah, it was a much more powerful engine. Of course, it used more fuel, but it gave the airplane tremendous performance. In fact, we incorporated that into the F-86H, which was the last model of the F-86 that was built.
And they built 108 or something like that in Australia.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And they were sold or traded to Indonesia when the Super Sabre came out.
Right.
Would you tell our viewers what a Super Sabre is?
Well, it's an entirely different airplane. It was the first fighter that we built that had afterburner, and actually made it a Mach 1 plus airplane in straight and level. It was the first supersonic airplane that we built. And swept wing, of course, one large intake in the nose, much heavier, much bigger, much larger, greater speed capability, and also carried a lot more armaments. A different airplane.
What is the definition of supersonic? Is that faster than the speed of sound?
That's correct, yeah. Faster than the speed of sound. The speed of sound at sea level is about 760 miles an hour. And the higher you go up, the slower the speed of sound is. So that's why you go to altitude to go to a higher Mach number.
Tell our viewers just a little bit about your flying experience. I told them you were a jet jockey with the Air Force. Did you fly propeller planes, or were you just a jet pilot?
Well, I flew prop airplanes in my training. I flew the PA-22 for 20 hours, and then the T-6 for 120 hours.
Is that the AT-6?
Yeah, great airplane. I love that airplane. And then I flew the T-28 for 40 hours in basic, and then the rest of the time was in jets. Although I did instruct in the T-28. I was instructing in a T-28, T-33 program there for a while. And then they went to a pure jet program.
We're going to take a break for just a minute for a very important message. And when we come back, we're going to talk about John Darmer, the antiquer, and the accomplished aviation artist. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Aviation Theater. Today we're visiting with John Darmer, and at this time we're going to be privileged to see some of his beautiful aviation paintings. John, would you tell our viewers about this painting?
I'd be happy to, Fred. This is a painting of a PT-17, a World War II primary trainer. It's acrylic on canvas. The dimensions are 24 by 36 inches, and I call it Stearman's Serendipity because the Stearman is in a beautiful setting, big puffy white clouds. They're happy, they're enjoying the flight. Everything is just right.
I love a Stearman airplane. I took an aerobatics course in a Stearman.
Did you? Yeah.
And it does everything at 70.
That's right. Slowly but surely.
Yeah. Tell our viewers the difference between an oil painting and an acrylic painting. Is it harder, more durable?
Well, they are different. Of course, the bases are different. Oil and acrylics. Acrylics, there's a water-based paint. It's easier to use, but it dries very fast. And it always dries darker than what you put down when it's wet. So it has this little, you have to learn the little tricks to working with acrylics.
It dries darker than while it's wet when you're painting.
Correct.
So you have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, you have to do a little mental arithmetic while you're painting it.
I took a painting class in graduate school, and the instructor told me that I was either another Rembrandt, because he painted in dark colors, or that I needed to clean my brush more often. I think I needed to clean my brush more often. There's a story about a woman who went in to have a hat made in Paris, and the designer whipped up a hat. He took a piece of ribbon and some thread and some flowers and some feathers and tied them together, put them in her hair, and she just loved it. She says, "Oh, it's just beautiful, Pierre, just beautiful. How much?" He says, $500. She says, $500 for a couple of feathers and a piece of ribbon? So he took the hat apart and laid the materials in her lap. He says, "Madam, the feathers and the ribbon are free."
Very good.
So what she was paying for was his artistic talent.
That's right. The creative part of it.
So I could take some oils and some brushes and paint Eat at Joe's or Ladies' Room This Way or something like that. But when you get into paintings like this, it's artistic talent that you're seeing.
I think so. I hope so.
John, are you sure this painting is not sideways? This airplane's flying straight up.
Positive, Fred. This is called vertical development. It's a gouache and acrylics on illustration board. And what I'm trying to bring out here is the development of the vertical growth of the clouds and the development of a dogfight in the vertical. The F-4 is going to get the MiG-21. He doesn't know it yet, but he's going to get him. He's going to do a half roll, tuck in behind, and get him with his cannon.
Very beautiful, very realistic.
Thank you.
I know these airplanes. These are Corsairs.
Right. The title of this one is Two Corsairs Flat-Hatting, and that's an old Navy term for buzzing. They did a lot of that in World War II when they weren't shooting down the Zeros. This is an acrylic on canvas, and it's 30 by 40 inches in dimension. And I enjoy doing this. I think a Corsair is a wonderful airplane. It's a fascinating airplane. It's a big, beefy, powerful, kind of semi-ugly bird, but it was a great fighter. It was also a very good ground attack airplane in World War II. They could carry a lot of bombs on this airplane. So it was a real dual-purpose fighter-bomber.
I know this airplane. I've flown in this airplane. This is Bill Allen's Ryan.
That's right.
And tell us just a little bit about this particular painting.
Well, I call this one First One Down. It's basically kind of an impromptu fly-in in a rather pretty location. And you can see here a little tiny Ryan coming into land, and these two fellows are watching it. They're going to judge it, of course. And I thought it was a pretty setting, having the tree, the bough of the tree over the airplane with the green and the blue sky. It kind of tells a little story. Just a happy little painting.
Very good. I think this is Pancho Barnes' mystery plane, isn't it?
Very close, Fred. It's one just like it. It's the Traveler Mystery, but hers was a different aircraft. This is a painting kind of depicting the 1930 Thompson Trophy race. It was a very tight race between these two aircraft. The Laird Super Solution, the one on the top, did win the race. This aircraft came in second. And it depicts a lot of action. This is done with gouache on watercolor paper, by the way, and the dimensions are about 18 by 23 or so.
John, let's give our viewers a sample of the good quality of your laser prints. This is one of a Beechcraft Stagger Wing.
Correct. Mm-hmm. I did that as a commission for a friend of mine, and
Addison Pemberton.
That's right, Addie Pemberton. Yeah. And if you look closely, you can actually see the weave of the canvas in that print, which is pretty remarkable.
I think this one shows your creative genius.
Well, thank you, Fred. I think I should call this nose art because it's actually the nose of a PT-22. But I thought it would be a very interesting study. It's not a whole aircraft, but I think it's a fascinating look at a very interesting airplane.
Well, it's not just the nose of an airplane, but the pictures and the reflection that's in the nose.
That's kind of challenging to paint. It's a watercolor, by the way.
Is this a Helldiver?
No, it's the Grumman F3F2. It was a pre-World War II Navy fighter. This is a study for a painting that I plan on doing later. I did a kind of a quick watercolor, and I thought it had some interesting aspects and some artistic potential. But it's, as I say, it's just a study, but it got a lot of color and a lot of action. I like it.
The one in the back is a Mustang. Is the one in front a submarine or a Spitfire?
That's a Mark 14 Spitfire, and that too is a study that I did of hopefully a larger painting. That's a watercolor, and I thought that those two airplanes are the two most beautiful fighters of World War II, so I decided to put them together in a kind of a late afternoon, very colorful background. Hope to do that in full size one of these days.
I can actually see the label on the propeller on this one.
Right, old Hamilton Standard.
Ham stand.
That's it. That one is a kind of a study once again. That's a watercolor. I kind of like it. I call it the big end of a Stearman.
John, is this a print of the big painting we saw before, or is this a different one?
No, it's a print of the big painting. I had to crop it a little bit to fit the size of the machine's reproduction dimension, and it shows the airplanes well, and you can still see most of the island and the background and so forth.
I believe this is the Cessna side-by-side two-place trainer.
Right, the T-37, and this was a commission that I did for a fellow Air Force pilot. This airplane's trained thousands and thousands of pilots in the military. I call this one the first solo roll because he's by himself and you can see the ailerons up. He's cranking in the aileron to do a nice aileron roll.
This is a B-25 Mitchell bomber.
Correct. This was a study that I did for a full-size painting, long since gone, of course, long since placed with a happy customer. And the painting pretty much came out the way I did this little study. And I thought, well, it's kind of pretty, and it shows the 25 at low altitude. We'll make a little print out of that, too.
Today, we've been pleased to visit with John Dormer and to learn about the F-86 Saberjet and about his beautiful aviation paintings. As always, this is Captain Fred saying, I love airplanes and I honor the people who fly them.